What if I told you some spirits never left their graves, and tonight they might be watching you? If you love ghost stories, hit subscribe, tap like, and share this video so we can bring you even more terrifying tales. Subscribe, like, share to keep the ghosts coming. The snow had only just begun to melt when Kyoto's streets filled with crimson. It was March again, the third month, when cherry blossoms hesitated on the edges of branches, unsure whether to bloom or wait for warmth. The city wore its seasonal masks, the mask of Hinamatsuri, red cloth draped across shelves in shop windows. Lanterns glowed faintly in the cool dusk, and behind sliding doors, families unpacked dolls. They came out of their boxes like royalty returning to a throne. Layer upon layer of silk, brocade, lacquered accessories polished until they gleamed under candlelight. A miniature kingdom was raised on platforms covered with vermilion carpet. An emperor, an empress, their court musicians, ministers, guards, attendants, each positioned precisely. Every household that celebrated believed in this ritual not as mere tradition but as a protection and offering of beauty to safeguard their daughters. Children squealed with delight at the sight of the dolls. Yet adults, when alone, sometimes glanced too long at those painted eyes, too serene, too watchful. For everyone in Kyoto knew the old warning whispered from mother to daughter, generation after generation, put the dolls away quickly, lest they come alive. It was said lightly, almost playfully, yet beneath the smile lay unease. Among the many families preparing for Hinamatsuri that year, there was one house whose celebration would become legend. The Nakamura residence stood at the edge of the Jian district, where narrow alleyways bled into wider streets, thrumming with the footsteps of merchants and pilgrims. The house was old, its beams darkened by centuries of incense smoke. Within it lived Haruko Nakamura, her husband Masanori, and their 7-year-old daughter Sayuri. Sayuri was a child of delicate beauty, with wide eyes that seemed always to drink in more than she could say. She had been sickly since birth, often confined indoors. Her world limited to the creak of tatami mats and the garden just beyond the sliding doors. Haruko adored her with a desperation only a mother who had nearly lost her child can understand. That year, Haruko decided the Hinamatsuri display would be more splendid than ever. She unwrapped each doll carefully, whispering apologies, as though speaking to living guests who had been waiting in darkness for 12 months. The emperor's robes shimmered with threads of gold. The empress's face was pale and perfect, her lips a stroke of crimson. Sayuri's eyes lit up when she saw the empress. "She looks alive, Mama," she whispered, almost afraid to speak too loudly. "She looks like she's watching me." Haruko smoothed her daughter's hair. "That is why she will protect you. These dolls keep away misfortune. They stand in your place so you can live happily." Sayuri tilted her head. "But if they stand in my place, doesn't that mean they can live instead of me?" The words unsettled Haruko, though she laughed softly. "Don't be silly. They are only dolls." Yet that night, as she extinguished the candles, she felt the weight of many eyes upon her. In Kyoto, stories drift like smoke from incense, curling into every house. The Nakamura family had heard them, as all families had. Some spoke of dolls whose silk sleeves rustled when no wind stirred, of tiny porcelain hands that shifted their positions by dawn, of dolls that appeared in dreams, whispering warnings in voices like bells underwater. There was the tale of the Kaneko family, whose daughter died young. Their empress doll wept wax tears during the funeral rites. Another of the Mori household, where a servant swore she saw a doll bow when no one else was watching. The priests explained it as the power of Tsukumogami, the belief that objects, especially those well-cared for, would awaken after years of devotion. Dolls, crafted to embody human forms, were the most susceptible, but some whispered that Hinamatsuri dolls were different. They were not merely vessels of good fortune. They absorbed misfortune, sickness, sorrow. Year after year, they took these burdens silently. And what happens to a vessel that fills too much? On the eve of the festival, Sayuri refused to sleep. She sat before the empress doll, her small hands folded in her lap, as though in reverence. The lantern beside her flickered, casting shadows across the doll's painted face. "Why do you sit there, Sayuri?" her father asked gently. "She told me a story." The girl answered. Masanori frowned. "Who told you?" Sayuri pointed with one small finger. The empress doll sat motionless, its gaze fixed forward, unblinking. "She said her name is Hinamatsuri," whispered Hina. The name spread through the household like a cold draft. Haruko scolded her daughter for imagining such things, but Masanori worried silently. Children often invent friends, yes, but something about Sayuri's conviction chilled him. The girl began speaking to the doll daily, whispering secrets, laughing at unheard jokes. At night, she claimed Hina visited her dreams. She wears robes of fire, Suri told her mother, and she says she was once alive. She says the festival is not just for celebration, but for remembering. Remembering what? Haruko asked, though dread already coiled in her stomach. Suri's voice dropped. Those who were not saved. The festival day arrived. The Nakamura household hosted relatives, filling the rooms with chatter, sake, and the clink of porcelain cups. Sayuri, pale but radiant in a pink kimono, sat proudly beside the doll display. Guests admired the arrangement, remarking on the Empress's uncanny beauty. Some said her face seemed almost too perfect, her eyes too alive. As the evening wound down and guests departed, the red-carpeted platform glowed faintly in the lamplight. Suri leaned against her mother, already drifting to sleep. Haruko glanced at the Empress doll one last time. Perhaps it was the fatigue of the day, or perhaps the trick of shadows, but she thought the doll's lips had curved ever so slightly into a smile. That night, Haruko dreamed she was walking through a river, the current pulling at her legs. All around her floated dolls, thousands of them, drifting face up, their eyes open, their silk robes sodden. Among them was the Empress, standing upright against the current, untouched by the water. Her painted lips moved. "Do not put me away," the doll whispered. "I have more to give." Haruko awoke, drenched in sweat. The lantern in the corner had gone out, yet the faintest glow seemed to linger around the doll platform. She wanted to wake Masanori to tell him, but when she looked at Sayuri, sleeping peacefully, she remained silent. The days after the festival should have been marked by careful packing away of the dolls. Tradition demanded it, yet each time Haruko tried to return them to their boxes, Sayuri cried, "Please, Mama, don't put Hina away. She'd be lonely." Haruko relented. A week passed. Then too, the dolls remained. Neighbors began to whisper. To leave dolls on display too long was to invite misfortune. Some recalled grim stories, girls who had fallen ill, families struck by strange accidents, houses that burned under unexplained circumstances. Haruko tried to dismiss these as superstition, yet she could not shake the feeling that the house had grown colder, that shadows lingered too long, that the doll's eyes followed her more boldly. One night, when the moon hung low and swollen, Masanori woke to the sound of silk rustling. He rose quietly, sliding the door open. There, in the dim glow of moonlight, he saw Sayuri kneeling before the Empress doll. But she was not alone. Another figure knelt beside her, robed in layers of crimson and gold, hair black as a raven's wing, face pale as porcelain. Before he could speak, the figure turned its head toward him. Its eyes were painted, yet alive. Masanori told no one, not Haruko, not even Suri. But from that night forward, he avoided the doll platform. The days stretched into weeks. Suri's health, which had been fragile, began to improve. Her cheeks glowed with color, her steps grew steadier. Haruko was overjoyed, but Masanori's heart sank with each sign of health, for he knew it was not natural. He remembered the words whispered by neighbors, the idea that dolls absorb misfortune, sickness, sorrow. Was Hina taking Sayuri's illness into herself, or was she taking something far more precious? Spring deepened into summer. The dolls remained on display. Guests no longer visited. The house had grown too strange. Lanterns flickered without wind. At night, footsteps echoed across empty rooms. Sayuri laughed in her sleep, her lips whispering conversations with unseen companions. One evening, as cicadas droned outside, Haruko found her daughter staring at the Empress doll. "What are you thinking about, my love?" she asked. Suri's eyes gleamed in the candlelight. "Hina says there is a price, but she won't tell me what it is." Thus begins the haunting of the Nakamura family. A haunting rooted not in sudden terror but in slow, creeping devotion. A child's love for a doll, a mother's silence, a father's fear, and above them all, the festival that had promised protection now threatened possession. For Hinamatsuri is not only a celebration of girls' futures, it is also a reminder of sacrifices made, of lives unfulfilled, of dolls who wait year after year for the burdens they have absorbed to transform into something else. And once a doll awakens, it does not sleep again. The summer heat lay heavy over Kyoto, thick with the hum of cicadas. But inside the Nakamura household, a different kind of weight pressed down. It was not heat, but a tension that clung to the skin, a silence too sharp, a presence that lingered even when the rooms seemed empty. The dolls had remained on their crimson platform long past the festival, their painted faces unchanging, yet not untouched. Haruko swore their silk sleeves had grown brighter, as though absorbing sunlight no one else could see. Masanori insisted that the Empress doll's lips had shifted, just slightly, into a knowing smirk. Siri claimed not only to see them move, but to hear their voices. "Hina sings to me," she told her mother one morning, her cheeks rosy. "She knows songs from long ago, songs no one remembers." And indeed, at night, faint melodies drifted through the corridors, not loud, not distinct, but enough to make the hairs along one's neck rise. Masanori lay awake beside Haruko, his fists clenched, listening to a child's lullaby sung by a voice that was not their daughter's. The first true sign that the dolls had awakened came on a night of storms. Rain lashed the wooden shutters, wind howled like wolves, and the Nakamura family huddled within. Sayuri, unafraid, insisted that Hina would keep them safe. A crash split the night. A tree outside the gate had been struck by lightning, its trunk splitting into flame. Masanori rushed out to douse it, but when he returned, dripping and exhausted, he froze in the doorway. The dolls had moved. They no longer sat in their neat imperial arrangement. The court musicians faced inward, their instruments poised as though mid-performance. The ministers had shifted closer, their painted eyes locked on the emperor and empress. And the empress herself, he now sat one step higher, her porcelain hands resting upon her lap as though claiming authority. Suri stood before them, bowing low, whispering words that Masanori could not hear. When he called her name, she did not turn. After that night, the changes became impossible to deny. Each dawn, the dolls appeared slightly different, a hand raised higher, a head tilted more directly toward Suri's bed. Once, Haruko swore the Empress doll had been standing when she entered, though by the time Masanori came, it sat again, serene as ever. Serene herself grew more attached. She no longer played with her other toys. She no longer sought her parents' comfort. Instead, she confided in Hina. "She tells me secrets, Mama," she said, eyes wide with wonder. "She says she remembers every girl she has ever protected. She remembers the sickness, the accidents, the deaths. She carries them all inside her." Haruko's heart tightened. "And why does she tell you this, my love?" Suri leaned close, her whisper like the rustle of silk. "Because she says I belong to her now." Rumors in the neighborhood swelled. People avoided the Nakamura house. Merchants crossed the street rather than pass its gate. Some claimed they saw shadows moving behind the shoshi screens at night, long after the lamps were out. Others whispered of hearing laughter, faint but chilling, carried on the wind. One old woman, bent with age, dared to warn Haruko, "Do you not know the truth of the dolls? They are vessels, yes, but vessels can overflow. A doll that drinks too much sorrow becomes a curse, and the Empress Shi is always the first to awaken. Burn them before it is too late." Haruko tried to heed the warning, but each time she approached the dolls with intent to put them away, her hands trembled. A weight pressed against her chest, and her vision blurred. It was as though the dolls themselves forbade it. Worse still, Sayuri screamed and wept whenever Haruko hinted at such a thought. "You can't," the child shrieked, her voice raw. "Hina will be angry. She'll leave me, and I'll die." Haruko collapsed in tears. Masanori, grim-faced, muttered, "Perhaps it would be better if we moved them to the temple." But even that, as they would soon learn, was not so simple. The first priest they sought out at Kenninji Temple refused to enter the house. He stood at the gate, his prayer beads trembling in his hands. "These dolls are not ordinary," he whispered. "I feel their weight from here. To attempt to banish them would be to invite their wrath. Only a shrine of dolls might contain them, but even then, they may resist." When Masanori pressed him, the priest shook his head firmly. "There are spirits within them, not one, not two, but many. They are not guardians now, they are a host that feeds on the living." Meanwhile, Sayuri's transformation deepened. Her voice sometimes carried a resonance too mature for a child, as though another spoke through her. She began to use archaic words no 7-year-old would know. Her drawings shifted from childish scribbles to intricate images of palaces, of women in Heian-era robes, of rivers filled with floating dolls. At night, she sat before the Empress doll and chanted softly, her voice weaving with the unseen chorus that filled the air. Haruko wept silently at the doorway, too frightened to enter. One evening, Masanori gathered his courage and stepped onto the tatami before the platform. He glared at the Empress doll, its face glowing faintly in the lamplight. "What do you want from my daughter?" he demanded. That the silence was unbearable. Then, the faintest sound, a laugh, not from Sayuri, who sat silent, but from the doll itself. The lacquered screen behind the platform trembled. A chill gust swept through the room, though every window was shut. The Emperor doll toppled forward as if bowing, its porcelain hand shattering on the floor. "Sayur," I smiled. "She says you should not question her." The haunting grew bolder. Objects moved on their own. Lanterns lit without flame. Visitors swore they felt unseen. Hands brushed their sleeves, tugging them toward the platform. One night, Haruko awoke to the sensation of being watched. She turned her head and nearly screamed. Suri stood beside the bed, her eyes wide open, but her expression empty. She held the Empress doll in her arms. "She wants to sleep with us tonight," Sayuri whispered. Haruko reached out to take the doll, but her hands recoiled at the touch of its silk robes. They were warm like living skin. From then on, Suri refused to be parted from Hina. She carried the Empress everywhere, even outside the house. Passersby stared, unsettled, whispering that the doll's eyes seemed to follow them. And then came the dreams. Not only for Haruko, but for Masanori too. He dreamt of endless corridors lined with dolls, their painted faces cracked, their robes soaked in blood. At the end of the corridor sat Hina, her porcelain face radiant, her hands outstretched. In his dream, Sayuri walked toward her, step by step, vanishing into the doll's embrace. Haruko dreamt of rivers again, this time not of dolls, but of girls, hundreds, their pale bodies drifting downstream, their eyes open and glassy. On the banks, the Empress doll stood watching, her lips curved into a smile. Each morning, they awoke with the same feeling. The doll was no longer merely protecting their daughter, it was consuming her. One evening, as summer rain poured, Masanori could bear it no longer. He seized the Empress doll from Suri's arms while she slept. Haruko pleaded, but he pressed forward, wrapping the doll in cloth and rushing to the river. Lightning split the sky. The river roared with stormwater. Masanori lifted the doll high, intending to hurl it into the torrent, but the cloth slipped. The doll's porcelain hand clutched his wrist. Masanori cried out, stumbling backward. The painted eyes seemed to flash, alive with fury. His heart pounded as he tore free, but when he looked again, the doll lay still in his hands, serene, expressionless. He could not do it. His strength failed him. Trembling, he returned to the house, drenched and broken. Suri awoke at that moment and screamed as though she had been stabbed. "You tried to kill her. You tried to kill me." She collapsed into sobs, clutching the doll tight. Haruko held her, glaring at her husband, but in her heart, she knew he had been right to try. From that night onward, Suri's bond with the doll became inseparable. Her laughter grew sharper, echoing unnaturally in the halls. Sometimes Haruko would catch her daughter's reflection in a mirror, only to see the Empress doll's face staring back. The haunting had fully awakened. The Nakamura family was no longer living in a house with dolls. They were living inside the doll's domain. And Hina, the Empress, the ghost of the Hinamatsuri, was no longer content to sit silently. She wanted more. The lanterns trembled, though no hands touched them. Their flames twisted upward, as if gasping for air, casting grotesque shadows of the dolls across the walls. Ayaka stood paralyzed before the altar, her breath shallow, as if invisible fingers coiled around her lungs. The dolls no longer seemed lifeless. Their eyes, once made of glass, glistened wetly, reflecting light in unnatural ways. And from the silence rose a sound, faint at first, then rising, the distinct timbre of laughter, childlike, yet hollow, sweet, yet broken. It filled the room like a poison, bouncing from wall to wall, until the very air felt soaked with dread. Ayaka staggered back, her hands clutching the charm the priest had given her, but the charm felt thin, brittle, useless against this overwhelming presence. Her grandmother's voice cracked the suffocating silence. "They are awake." Ayaka turned, her voice trembling. "Who? What are they?" The old woman's eyes were wide, glistening, her voice not so much spoken as breathed. "The forgotten ones, the dolls that carried the souls of girls no longer remembered, the children left to linger between worlds." The laughter deepened, joined now by whispers, dozens, perhaps hundreds, weaving together into a storm of voices. Some were soft and sorrowful, others shrill with rage. They spoke in fragments of prayers, lullabies, and pleas for release. Ayaka pressed her hands to her ears, but the voices were inside her head, crawling like insects beneath her skull. The dolls on the platform shuddered. One tipped forward, then another, as if pulled by unseen strings. Their tiny heads turned, impossibly slow, their gazes locking onto her. The Empress doll, seated at the top, tilted her head in mock grace, and Ayaka swore the corners of its mouth curled into a faint smile. Her grandmother fell to her knees, chanting prayers that cracked under the weight of fear. Komi-sama, guide them, bring them peace. But the words seemed swallowed before they reached the air. Ayaka, desperate, shouted into the cacophony, "What do you want from me?" The answer came not from her ears but from her bones, vibrating through her marrow. "Remember us." The room tilted. She saw flashes that weren't hers, visions of girls in ancient kimono, laughing at a festival, their faces glowing in the light of lanterns. Then, darkness. She saw the same girls, pale, silent, their bodies still, while dolls were placed beside them in graves. She saw mothers weeping, clutching dolls as if they were children. She saw dolls cast into rivers, their painted faces bobbing helplessly against the current. She saw others buried, forgotten, broken. And through it all, a hunger grew, a need not to be discarded, not to be erased. The visions ended abruptly, leaving Ayaka gasping, her body trembling. She understood then. The Hinamatsuri dolls were not simply decorations. They were vessels. They carried memory, spirit, fragments of identity. To neglect them was to neglect the souls they protected. But there was something more, something darker. Among the crowd of spirits, one loomed larger, its presence suffocating. It was not like the others, neither childlike nor sorrowful. It was a shadow wearing the face of the Empress doll, its aura thick with resentment. The others orbited it, bound by its will. The Empress doll moved. Slowly, impossibly, it lifted from its seat, rising into the air, kimono sleeves fluttering though there was no wind. Its eyes gleamed, twin pools of ink, bottomless and unyielding. Ayaka's heart hammered as the doll floated toward her, its porcelain face inches from her own. The whisper storm fell silent. Then, in a voice both delicate and venomous, it spoke. "You carry their blood. You owe us remembrance. You owe us life." Ayaka staggered back, her hand brushing against one of the other dolls. Instantly, she felt something enter her, a cold rush like water flooding her veins. A child's voice cried inside her skull, "Don't let her take us. Don't let her bind us again." The Empress doll tilted its head. "They are weak. I am strong. Only through me will their memory endure. Join me, child of this bloodline, or be devoured." Her grandmother cried out, "Ayaka, resist her. She is not a guardian. She is the devourer." But the doll's voice slid like silk through her mind. "Without me, they are scattered shadows. With me, they are eternal. You will be eternal. Do you not wish to live beyond death, to never be forgotten?" Ayaka's chest tightened. She thought of her mother, gone too soon, of the empty house that had always felt filled with echoes. The temptation flickered, the mortality, remembrance, the end of loneliness. But then, she thought of the girls in her visions. Their laughter turned to silence, their souls bound instead of freed. Was this eternal life, or eternal prison? Her grandmother reached for her, her hand trembling but her eyes fierce. The dolls are meant to protect, not enslave. Ayaka, listen to the children, not the queen. The Empress doll shrieked, the sound piercing like glass shattering inside Ayaka's skull. The other dolls trembled violently, some cracking, some spilling their painted fragments across the tatami. Shadows swirled from their broken shells, writhing forms of pale girls with hollow eyes. They cried, screamed, reached out with hands too thin, too translucent. The room became a storm of grief and rage. Ayaka clutched the charm again, though it burned in her hand as if rejecting her fear. She screamed into the chaos, "I will not let you bind them. I will not let you use me." The Empress doll lunged, its face twisting into something monstrous, its porcelain cracking to reveal a void of teeth and ash beneath. The air exploded into a whirlwind. The tatami ripped from the floor, the paper walls tore like tissue, and the house groaned as if about to collapse. Ayaka closed her eyes, clutching the charm with both hands, and shouted words that came not from her but from the voices inside her. Go to the river. Be free. Be carried. Be remembered. The dolls shattered. One by one, their shells broke apart, releasing streams of light that shot upward like fireflies. The pale figures of children rose, their faces softening, their whispers now filled with gratitude instead of sorrow. They floated toward an unseen horizon, their forms dissolving into the night. But the Empress resisted. It screamed, clawing at the air, trying to hold the others back. Its face stretched into grotesque shapes, desperate, furious. You cannot unmake me. I am the heart of their grief. I am eternal. Ayaka, shaking, raised the charm higher, though it blistered her skin. Then you will remain alone. The Empress shrieked, its voice collapsing into a howl that was neither human nor doll. Its porcelain body fractured, exploding into shards that dissolved before touching the floor. What remained was only silence, heavy and thick. Ayaka collapsed, her chest heaving, her palms scorched and raw. Her grandmother crawled to her side, tears streaming down her face. You freed them, she whispered. But Ayaka did not feel free. The air was still heavy, as if something lingered. The tatami was cracked, the walls scorched, and in the center of the platform where the Empress once sat, a single shard of porcelain remained, blackened, sharp, and humming with faint energy. Ayaka stared at it, dread curling in her stomach. She knew the story was not over. Something had been broken, but something else had been awakened. The lanterns flickered one last time before extinguishing, plunging the room into darkness. The silence was thick. It pressed down on Ayaka and her grandmother like a suffocating blanket, heavier than the storm that had preceded it. In the center of the tatami floor, that shard of porcelain gleamed faintly, as if drinking the darkness rather than reflecting it. The house smelled of ash and wet earth. Though no fire had burned and no rain had fallen, Ayaka's grandmother reached for the shard, but Ayaka grabbed her wrist. Don't touch it. The old woman nodded slowly, her breath unsteady. It carries her essence. Even broken, the Empress remains. Ayaka looked around the ruined room, her heart still thundering. The dolls were gone, their fragments dissolved into light, their souls freed. And yet, she felt no peace. It was as if the house itself exhaled with unease, a sigh too deep for timber or paper to make. Her grandmother whispered, "We must bury it at the shrine, seal it before she gathers strength again." But as Ayaka gazed into the shard, she saw flicker a reflection not of herself, but of someone else. A girl in a red kimono, her face blurred as though painted in water and then smudged by a careless hand. She stood behind Ayaka, though when Ayaka turned, the space was empty. Her skin prickled. What if sealing it isn't enough? Her grandmother's silence was answer enough. They wrapped the shard in layers of cloth, placed it into a wooden box, and carried it through the moonlit streets to the shrine. The path was eerily quiet, the air colder than it should have been in early spring. No dogs barked, no wind stirred, no human voices carried from neighboring houses. It was as if the entire village held its breath, waiting. At the shrine, the priest was already awake, as though he had known they would come. His eyes fell upon the box, and his expression hardened. It should not be here. Ayaka's grandmother bowed deeply. Forgive us. It could not be destroyed. The priest knelt, placed his hands upon the box, and whispered prayers. His lips moved with precision, but his forehead gleamed with sweat. The wooden box trembled beneath his touch. A low hum, like the drone of distant bees, filled the shrine. Then, faintly, a voice seeped from within. Ayaka froze. The priest's chanting faltered for just an instant. The voice came again, clear, silken, seductive. They left, but I remain. You freed them, but not yourself. You are mine. Ayaka stumbled back, pressing her hands to her ears. No. The priest slammed the box shut with both hands and bound it in a sacred rope. This presence is not gone. She is bound to you. His eyes met Ayaka's with grim certainty. You are her vessel now. Ayaka's knees weakened. What do you mean? Her grandmother's voice cracked. It means the Empress's essence seeks a host. In breaking her body, you invited her into your blood. She will not release you so easily. The priest lowered his gaze, his voice low. We can seal fragments, delay her return, but some ties cannot be cut. The Empress is older than the festival, older than memory. She has survived centuries by binding herself to those who resist her. He turned to Ayaka. You have already heard her. She is inside you. Ayaka felt the words sink into her like needles. The cold that had lingered since the confrontation surged deeper into her chest, a weight pressing behind her ribs. She remembered the moment the doll floated before her, its voice like silk inside her mind. Join me, child of this bloodline. Had she already given it space, simply by listening? Her grandmother wept quietly. Then what must we do? The priest shook his head. Wait, guard her, pray, and hope that the Empress's hunger will not consume the girl entirely. The words settled like ash in the room. There was no relief, no triumph, only the awareness that the battle had not been won, merely postponed. Days turned into weeks. The house was repaired, the tatami replaced, the walls mended, but Ayaka felt no safety. She heard whispers at night, the rustle of silk where no one moved, the tap of porcelain feet across the floorboards. When she looked into mirrors, her reflection lagged for a fraction of a second, and in that delay, its lips sometimes moved, though hers did not. Once, she woke to find the shard of porcelain lying on her pillow, though it had been sealed away at the shrine. She touched it in panic, and it dissolved into dust before her eyes, seeping into her skin. For days afterward, her voice carried an echo, as though two people spoke at once. The villagers grew restless. They whispered of Ayaka's family carrying a curse. Children no longer played near their house, and neighbors crossed the street rather than greet them. On Hinamatsuri the following year, families set their dolls afloat on the river, but the current stilled. The dolls drifted in circles, as if refusing to leave. And then came the dreams. Ayaka dreamed of the Empress sitting at her bedside, smiling with porcelain perfection, stroking her hair with cold fingers. In the dream, the Empress whispered, "We are one. The festival will never end, as long as you breathe." Ayaka awoke screaming, but her grandmother was too frail to do more than hold her trembling body. One night, as the moon swelled full, Ayaka wandered to the river. She carried with her a doll, an old one, cracked but beloved, that had belonged to her mother. She whispered to it, as if it could hear, "If they can be freed, maybe I can too." She placed it into the water, praying it would drift away, but the river froze around the doll, ice spreading outward in jagged veins. The doll's painted face turned upward, its lips moving, though it had no voice. And then Ayaka heard it again, the voice she could never escape. "You cannot free yourself from me. You set me loose. You carry me. You are my festival now." She fell to her knees, her sobs muffled by the night. The moon's reflection rippled across the ice, distorted, as if two moons stared down at her, one white, one black, and somewhere, faint but clear, came the laughter of children, the ones she had freed. Their voices carried on the night air, but instead of comfort, they sounded like a warning. The shrine bells tolled in the distance, though no priest was there to ring them. The Hinamatsuri festival returned the following spring. Lanterns lit the river, dolls were placed upon the current, and families prayed for their daughter's happiness. But among the crowd, people noticed Ayaka standing at the bank, silent, her eyes glassy, her lips parted in the faintest smile. The dolls that year did not float downstream. They circled her instead, their painted eyes locked onto her. The water rippled as if something stirred beneath, and a shiver ran through every onlooker. None spoke of it aloud, but all carried the dread home with them. In time, legends grew. They said the Empress doll had not been destroyed, merely reborn in flesh. That Ayaka herself had become the vessel of the Hinamatsuri ghost. That if one looked too long into her eyes, one saw their reflection tilt its head, smiling back with porcelain grace dot. And so the festival continued. Year after year, under the shadow of something unspoken, parents still set dolls afloat, still prayed for their daughters' futures. But behind every whispered blessing lingered fear that the dolls were no longer offerings of protection, but tributes to a queen who watched from the riverbank, smiling with eyes that belonged to both porcelain and flesh. And she remained, sometimes seen, sometimes not, wandering the streets in silence. Some said she aged, slowly, too slowly. Others claimed she did not age at all. But whenever the festival came, she was there, and the dolls followed her. The final truth lay shrouded in silence, the kind that hums in the bones rather than the ears. For in Japan's heart, where spring lanterns glow and dolls drift across the river, the line between celebration and haunting has grown so thin it can no longer be seen. That Hinamatsuri festival is still celebrated. Dolls are still displayed, girls still laugh in the lantern light. But in the quiet moments, when the wind carries whispers through the trees, one cannot help but wonder, are the dolls watching with love, or with hunger? And somewhere, perhaps behind you, a porcelain smile waits,